This is about how do you bring about what will be a profound industrial change, swapping the fuel that powers all our cars, all our vans, from petrol and diesel to electricity, and doing that in basically a few years. That is Labour's ambition. Of course, it's the ambition of the Conservative Party too when they were in government. Both sides accept what they call the electric vehicles mandate, which is a timetable to make this happen. But you would have never guessed there was any consensus if you were listening to Parliament today, where the Leader of the Opposition added the job losses we were talking about in Luton to her general charge that Labour's budget is hitting business.
Perhaps he can show more concern for the 1,100 people who found out yesterday that they could lose their jobs at Vauxhall's plant in Luton. Does the Prime Minister stand by his promise to ban the sale of petrol cars by 2030, even if more jobs will be lost?
The question of the position of jobs in Luton is a very serious one, and families and workers will be very worried, and we are obviously engaging with them. I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that the EV mandates that are an issue in this particular case were actually introduced by the last government.
So, Neil, what's the review looking at then?
We could see there, obviously, the two leaders trying to blame each other for this problem, but there is an acceptance about the need to phase in the shift to electric vehicles. It's meant to happen in stages. The problem is the car industry says that they are way off the pace. Here's the problem, according to them. So the plan was in 2024, 22% of all cars sold in the UK would be electric. And at the time that they agreed to that, the car industry thought that they'd be producing 457,000 electric cars, and that would be over 23% market share. So target met, everybody happy. The problem is this is not the way things are currently heading. They currently reckon they're going to do 363,000 electric cars. That is going to be about 19% of the market. So target not met. And when that happens, for all the car companies who are not meeting those market share targets, they face a fine of £15,000 per car. The industry says overall that's going to cost all of them £1.8 billion.
So at its heart, what has gone wrong with the electric car market then?
I think it's worth bearing in mind that electric car sales are going up, and actually quite strongly, 14% so far this year. When these targets were agreed, it was before the cost of living crisis. And of course, energy prices have gone up, raw material prices have gone up. So the cost of building these cars has not come down quite as expected. And at the same time, car companies, to drive their sales, have been discounting them heavily. And this is one of the complaints that Stellantis, the company involved in Luton, has made, which is the profitability of making these cars is just not as high as they thought it was going to be. I mean, green campaigners feel the industry may be slightly overplaying their hand here. But I think the other big concern is whether another review into this system might simply put off more consumers who wonder when is this change ever going to happen.
Indeed. Neil, thanks very much.
Well, I'm joined now by Colin Walker, Head of Transport at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I just wonder, what's your sense of where this consultation is going to go? Do you think that this backlash from the car industry is justified?
Well, not really. I think the mandate is actually working. We're seeing manufacturers generously discounting their electric vehicles as they compete with each other for sales to hit their targets. And that is driving down prices, and that is good for the consumer, and explains why EV sales are increasing in 2024. As has been mentioned, sales are 14% higher so far than they were at this stage in 2023. September was a record-breaking month for the number of EVs sold. And for the last 3 months, more than 1 in 5 cars sold in the UK has been an electric vehicle. So that suggests the mandate's working, and to change it, to fiddle it with undermine consumer confidence, would undermine business confidence, but it could also see prices going back up and demand weakening.
We've heard more and more noises from the industry. Stellantis, owner of Vauxhall, saying that the rules in this have partly changed their decision to get job losses. And then you've got Ford saying the one thing we need is government-backed incentives to urgently boost the uptake of electric vehicles. They have a point, don't they?
Well, obviously, the news from Luton is very worrying, and our thoughts go out to the community. But I think it's a bit of a stretch to try to suggest that what's happening to the factory in Luton is because of the EV sales targets. As the chief operating officer of Nissan at the time when all of Nissan's vans were built at the factory in Luton has said, there's been a lot of uncertainty surrounding that factory for decades now. Stellantis' problems are well known. They've lost a lot of very top-level executives. Sales are really down in America. Their share price has fallen. And I think it's those kind of problems that are behind this decision, not the introduction of EV sales targets that only came into effect this year.
There is a little bit of a worry, isn't there, from jobs in Luton, you've got Sunderland, the West Midlands. People start to think and hear about net zero and then equate that to job losses.
I understand the concern that exists, but the reality is that global EV sales are only going in one direction, up. Last year, 14 million EVs were sold globally. This year, 17 million are expected to be sold. And it would be a strange decision to respond to that upward trajectory of EV sales by slowing down the transition to EVs. That would be a recipe for job losses, for factory closures. The future of our car industry is in shifting to producing the EVs that our major export markets are going to increasingly demand.
But the government needs to put more money in. Just thinking, if someone's going to buy a new car, their old car's broken down, it's a cost of living crisis, and they go to buy a petrol or diesel car, that's going to be 15, maybe 20 grand cheaper than buying an electric. So government need to plug that gap, don't they?
Well, certainly EVs are more expensive, but the gap between them and petrol and diesel cars is coming down. And in fact, we've pretty much reached price parity across much of a second-hand market.
Probably not fast enough if you're buying something right now, though.
No, and I completely understand that government should look at what role it can play to help the car industry make the transition to building EVs and sell the EVs that is required of it under the zero-emission vehicle mandate. So government should certainly look at this, but I don't think there really is any case for any weakening of the targets at this stage.
Just from your sense of today, what we've seen at PMQs and people saying that there's a political consensus that almost seems like it's breaking down, what do you think the implications of that could be?
Well, the shift to net zero is something that affects us all, and certainly would like to see that consensus remain between the two main parties in Westminster. But the Conservatives introduced the zero-emission vehicle mandate, and it's something they should be proud of. It showed real global leadership. The rest of the world is looking to the UK and looking to emulate what we have done. And the mandate
but they've said it should be pushed back from 2030 to 2035. So they're saying that it should be pushed back.
No, what Labour have done have simply returned the phase-out date to what it originally was when Boris Johnson introduced it a few years ago. There is really very little, there's no difference at all from what Labour is proposing to happen and what the Conservative government originally proposed.
OK, Colin Walker, thank you very much for joining us this evening.